Good afternoon, ore diggers. I hope everybody's doing well. Um, for everybody out here who is a regular, you're probably noticing that I am not Ruth Jones. I am John Griffin. I'm one of her colleagues on the alumni engagement team. Ruth is currently out of the office for today, so I will be stepping up to the plate to do my best, Ruth Jones, and be extremely positive and engaging. It's a really hard task. She just sets a very high bar, but we're excited to be here with everybody. Happy spring and happy E-Days. We're getting started with that here on campus. We've had a lot of festivities going on all across the US and globally. And our full E-Days events are going to be happening starting tonight, tomorrow, Saturday. So hopefully you all are engaging with some E-Day celebrations wherever you're at. Welcome to our April Lunch Bunch, our monthly look at the various people and programs that make Minds exceptional. If you're new here, we are glad that you're here. If you're a regular, and I see many of you, thank you for coming back. It's always wonderful to see you. Today's focus is going to be on critical minerals, the materials powering everything from AI and satellites to energy, medicine, defense, and so much more. Today is a very exciting lunch bunch as we will be hearing from Alicia Polo y Laborda Cavero, the newly appointed Executive Director of Critical Minerals and Strategy, Critical Minerals Strategy and Advancement, as well as Brad Handler, the Program Director of the Mines Energy Finance Lab at the Payne Institute, on how the research that is currently happening at Mines is helping tackle all of the challenges that come with critical minerals, one of the world's most pressing resources at this time. Before we get started and I hand the center screen off, if you have any questions during the program, please feel free to put them in the chat, raise your hand to let us know, or chime in. Alicia and Brad said that they like for a more engaging conversation. So as we are going through their presentation, if you have questions or comments, please jump on in and let us know. All of our Lunch Bunch programs are recorded and they can be accessed on our Lunch Bunch page on the alumni website at weare.minds.edu. So if you've missed any in the past and you want a refresher, you can go and find them there. Or if today's conversation is amazing and stirs a lot of brain power on your end and you want to revisit it later on, you can find it on our website. And finally, as always, if you have any ideas for future speakers or topics that you want to know more about, let us know. Keep them coming. We're always doing our best to try and provide you with the content you're interested in. So, with all of that taken care of, let's get started. Please help me in welcoming Alicia and Brad to the April Lunch Bunch. Thank you all. Alicia?
There we go. Thank you very much. I was just checking if you all can see my screen. Is that good?
Yep, it looks great.
Thank you. So we divided the presentation, and first of all, I would like to thank Brad Handler for joining me. He might be a new face for a lot of you, but he's a great colleague working at the Payne Institute, and he runs the finance lab. He's taking over the place from Ian Lang today. Professor Lang has been testifying at the US-China Economic Security Commission today in Congress at almost at the same time as Dr. Elizabeth Hawley was testifying on the House Science Subcommittee of Energy. So very actively driving the conversation in Washington, D.C. this week for Colorado School of Mines, and we are very, very proud of that. So the presentation today is divided in two parts. The first part is to set the scene, and that's what Brad is going to be presenting for the ones of you that the topic is new. Why are we discussing critical minerals now, and which opportunities that brings for our university? And on the second part, I will be covering the strategy, the work that we are doing, and also towards the end, opportunities for you all to engage. So go ahead, Brad.
Okay, thanks, Alicia. And hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all today, and I'm glad I had the chance to fill in for Dr. Lang. So as John and Alicia mentioned, I work for the Payne Institute for Public Policy, which serves as sort of a think tank within Minds. Just a little more on that in case you're not familiar with Payne. We have a dual function. One is to highlight research underway at the school, to put that work into more easily understandable terms and to put it into kind of a current context. A number of Minds faculty are Payne fellows, and when we certainly help them out, but they lead, in many senses, they lead those efforts. And then the second thing we do is produce our own research. And our focus broadly is on a couple of things. First, energy and material security in the United States. And then secondly, global socioeconomic development. We still come at both of those focuses and from areas of mine strength. So we tend to really be looking at things in the subsurface, mining, fossil fuels, geothermal energy, et cetera. And just quickly about me, again, as you heard, I'm running our finance lab, which is really means I'm running the economics, finance, and markets related research that cuts across anything that Payne cares about. And just by way of background, I came to Payne about 5 years ago after a career on Wall Street as an equity research analyst covering the oil field services sector. And so I was sitting at a few different investment banks over the years. Okay, so let me turn to critical minerals and offer some contextual comments and really, again, as she said, set the stage for Alicia to share more about what Minds is doing in all of these areas. So critical minerals has, of course, become a pretty hot topic over the last few years. The sense of urgency emerged earlier with the concept of energy transition, a shift in how the world would consume energy, which was animated by mitigating against climate change. That shift away from fossil fuels into renewable energies and electrification is just a very mineral intensive one. And that was gradually realized. Batteries, solar, windmills, electricity distribution, they all require a lot of minerals. Now, the concept of energy transition clearly feels like less of a driving force today, particularly in the United States. But the cost efficiencies in renewables, as well as the volatility of fossil fuel prices, keep the dynamics of electrification of energy very relevant. And that's certainly something Payne continues to pay a lot of attention to. In the meantime, civil society came to understand that other aspects of modern economies are also very mineral intensive. Semiconductors that are powering our electronic devices require 30 or more elements. Among them, critical minerals such as gallium, germanium, indium, hafnium, titanium, and tantalum, just to name a few. And the US's defense capabilities are also tied to critical minerals availability. So the things that make our submarines and our fighter planes harder to detect or make them lighter or stronger, these are all tied to respective minerals. And of course, all this understanding on the demand side collided with our realization, like in so many other ways related to manufacturing, China now dominates production of most of these different minerals, and that China will exercise that leverage by curtailing access to critical minerals if trade negotiations don't go the way they want or something along those lines. So what feels like all of a sudden, but really isn't, our commercial industry and our defense industrial base are vulnerable actors when it comes to minerals of all sorts. And so governments in the global north and companies are trying to figure out what to do about it. Alicia, next slide, please. So in a way, that's really most of the story, but let me go through a few other thoughts quickly with a few slides. So the first step, if you will, in the recent thinking about critical minerals was to define which minerals are critical. And this actually has not been entirely straightforward. The US alone wound up creating 3 different lists over the course of time, albeit with a lot of overlap. And those covers dozens of minerals. But any definition includes a view that the mineral is important, that it's vulnerable to a supply shock if a dominant provider willingly or unwillingly can't supply it. Next slide. The second step has been to try to determine how much of a mineral will be in demand, well, how much will be needed. And here's one illustration of a view put out by the Department of Energy. But demand needs to be considered over decades, as hard as it is to think about forecasting accurately over decades. Demand for one use can vary a lot. I mean, think about the impact of a lot more or a lot fewer EVs and how hard it is to forecast how many will be required. Or now with the sudden interest in AI, all of a sudden sort of the notion of semiconductor chip demand is impossible to grasp. The demand for any one mineral can also vary because technology can change quickly, and mines professors are hard at work trying to find more efficient versions of some technologies and substitutes and the like. And again, I think Alicia is going to talk to some of that in a little bit. Next slide, please. So our society is kind of waking up to the issues of critical minerals and looking for solutions. But as we look for those solutions, it's important to bear in mind that the minerals are vastly different, and not just in their physical properties. There is no one thing called critical minerals. One important differentiator is their market size. So annual copper use is 6 times that of nickel, 122 times that of lithium, and 36,000 times that of gallium. And all in different ways are incredibly important to fueling our modern economies. But I stress that point about market size because it is a big driver or a big part of driving different dynamics, like how concentrated production is. And it's going to impact how many customers across how many industries there are for each mineral, and if the government's going to step in to help secure supply, how much that will cost. Next slide, please. And I guess this leads me to the final point, which is that to develop solutions, we really have to understand the problem that is China's dominance. With that understanding, you can start to appreciate the distinction between mining and processing, and then the extent to which China has also built up its own sources of demand for these materials, or the downstream, if you will, creating its own economic ecosystem. Now, of the three, mining is the relatively easier challenge. Deposits of these critical minerals tend to be in lots of places. That's not to say there aren't some natural advantages. There are areas of higher concentrations of the minerals in mined rock, like Australia for lithium, Indonesia for nickel, China and Myanmar for heavy rare earths, etc. But generally, many other areas have these deposits, and therefore you can start to work with them. The bigger challenge is how to economically refine them into high purity concentrations. And this is where China has systematically invested for over 30 years. And it's gotten to the point where Chinese entities are refining 90% or more of some of the world's, of some of these minerals, of the entire world's consumption. Further, by building up industries that need these minerals, think batteries as a great example, China has also provided a natural off-taker for the mineral processors. And it's that whole chain, that vertical integration, which provides commitments to take the minerals that's allowed supply chains to flourish, in addition to government subsidy. And so the big hurdle that the US or OECD governments face is how do we support processors and the sources of demand to nurture a true alternative supply chain? China has built up scale and technical know-how, allowing them to refine minerals and make stuff out of them a lot cheaper than we can. How do we best compete with that? How much money and in what form are we going to have to throw at this to compete? And then to bring us back to mines, can research help us leapfrog in processing or in producing products such that we can fight China's built-up cost advantage? These are the questions we're confronting today. And it really is a set of very exciting questions. So thank you, and I will turn it back to Alicia.
Thank you very much, Brad. And we hope that summary and setting the scene part was useful to see what is the role and how is it that we feel and we are aligned that mines is in a very unique and best position to be addressing this challenge of the need of articulating critical minerals in the world, and with some emphasis in the United States. So first of all, we have, and as I'm familiar with some of you, not everyone, I have been in this position for 4 months now. Prior, I have 25 years on experience on mineral economic analysis and mining policy. A lot of that is connected to the copper industry. I've had positions in Peru where I am originally from, in Europe, in Chile, and I have been in Colorado for 10 years now. Prior to this position, I worked for 2.5 years at the Copper Mark, which is a standard for responsibly copper production. And before that, I was at the School of Mines with the position of managing projects of research in South America. So with this, we have identified, and it's clear for us that there are 4 pillars that are going to help us thrive in solution-oriented mechanism for critical minerals. One is the end-to-end value chain. Second is workforce development. Then we have innovations and solutions. At the end is world-class facilities, where it's connected with the building that we recently acquired and was announced last week. In the end-to-end value chain, we have expertise spanning the full cycle of critical minerals, and we are connected in every stage that fits into the other. So as Brad mentioned, first we start with geology and mining that has the feedstocks of scrap and mineral. And this part of the industry thinks of timeframes of more 20 years or more, especially traditional miners are always looking for their tier one big deposits long life. Then we have the processing and recovery, which is being a source of innovation and challenge for critical minerals. We have feedstock from scrap of recycled metal, and the timeframes tend to vary, but usually are for over 10 years. On a manufacturing stage, we have recycled metal elements, so see how we change from mineral into metal. And then here we start talking about elements. And the mindset is many times around a 3-year time. And this is just because of the nature of the industry and how innovation runs and the needs and a faster reaction to the consumer. So we have a final user that identifies recycle, that is talking about the parts. Nobody talks about copper. We talk about the cable of our phone, right? And in geology, so for copper, it would be mineral copper, metal or element, and then it becomes a cable. And the time frame is much faster, right? We are thinking about the phone that we are buying is going to last 2-3 years, 5 max. But that comes from a mine where the evaluation is running on 20 years. So that brings an interesting challenge, which is going to be solved with the adequate workforce development. As you know, we are a public R1 research university. We're training the next generation of problem solvers, and that's central of the work that we do. But beyond the mining engineering, we are training science and faculty and students all along the value chain, and we are seeing an increasing application of students. We are seeing an increasing application for graduates. But more than that, we see people already in the workforce from the upstream and the downstream trying to understand their counterparts. So we are engaged with mining companies that are now very keen on understanding how the consumption is growing, to see where the demand and innovation of the products that they produce are. And likewise, we are seeing companies in the downstream that are trying to understand where the elements and the metals are coming from. And that is in the background of this critical minerals conversation. That is at the core of that debate. And in the images that Brad showed at the beginning, we can see clearly that in addition to the miner, the government, and the community, the consumer has become the new stakeholder. And that is also behind the need of having a better workforce development. In regards of world-class facilities, we have been, the campus, 150 years old. We have the Egar mine. We have explosive labs. I brought these images that they will recall some memories to some of you, and that this is not new. The part that is new is the building that we have acquired. This building is a 50,000 square foot facility in Golden, is in the Course Technology Center. It's only a 10-minute drive from the main campus. The facility has 4 spikes, the central one, and then this 1, 2, 3, 4. The first one at the front is mostly oriented to people. It has office space, meeting rooms, and a space where we feel it's going to be a great area to convene. Then it has these 2 that are lab bench areas that we hope that it's going to be for, bringing solutions. And the 4th one that is for a pilot scale space with high ceilings, where projects with proof of concept can take place, technology development demonstration. For now, the building is going to be focused on critical materials, on critical minerals. It is not going to be the typical university research lab, but rather it is located in an industrial area. We can move projects faster into commercialization. And we are also looking to have the presence of a more established company. So the evaluation of who and when it's going to be occupied is work in progress in our leadership. but we hope to have very good news to share soon. And this is also part of something bigger. So this building hub, again, is going to have some academic research oriented to solving problems, startups. We want to create, we are already becoming a center of innovation and commercialization, but also that there's a new building in construction in campus that is owned by the USGS. So the USGS being the beginning of the value chain. Think about the geology, where the resources are. We have the new building plus network around it. And we have the National Laboratory of the Rockies that is now focused on the downstream. So within the three of us, we are part of a much larger hub that, again, it's bringing solutions in the area, and we are already feeling that it's putting Goldin on the spotlight. The work that we are doing on critical minerals is complemented by the work on the mines federal relations. Andrew Latanner is our Director of Federal Relations, that he's now in Washington, accompanying Dr. Holly and Dr. Land. And the strategic engagement of federal partners is to advance the university's missions and to maximize the impact of mines education, research, and leadership. So we are working on elevating the mines expertise, develop and deepen partnerships, inform public policy and science priorities, and growth of mines impact. We have become a trusted partner of the Congress. This slide shows some examples of the participations that we had last year. And today we are going to add 2 more to the list. And I would like to share an example of how and why this develops. So there was a good example last year of a paper that was funded by the NSF on growing convergence research, responsible critical minerals. This was led by Dr. Elizabeth Holly. It was a good paper published on Science related to the byproduct recovery from the United States metal minings. This paper got attention and was transformed in an editorial on the Washington Post that also came with, there are a number of pieces of the work that we do coming into press, but this was an important piece of opinion in the Washington Post that then led of Dr. Holly touring Washington on giving high-level briefings. And some of these high-level briefings led into the additional stage, which was the bipartisan byproduct amendment. It's one of the few bipartisans that have been driven in the administration and unintentional, which led into mines turning science into into policy impact, with this policy recommendation that then is resulting in opportunities from Department of Energy funding. And of course, this is opening the door for further collaborations and opportunities. So on that, I haven't seen any questions. John, let me know, but then we can go more into what is happening next with opportunities that alumni can engage with Mines as a solutions provider. So first, it was in the workforce development. We are trying to integrate more of the activity across campus and also beyond higher education. We are looking now and coordinating with the Department of Energy. There's also need of other like plumbers and different needs that the mining industry needs beyond the mining engineering. So we are working on that. We are working on the value chain piece, understanding demand. We have been doing a lot of work on understanding supply, and as Brad said, the pricing mechanisms and the limitation of the markets of these critical minerals are putting the brakes on investment, because you cannot invest if you don't understand what is going to be the demand leading into the price. So we have engineering and science on campus that are going to help us understand where really the long-term consumption can be lying. That's the part of work on policy engagement and economics. And we have been having different requests by international organizations as well as federal government in the United States on understanding these markets. And we need to see how better to leverage the assets. So the new building is an example. So with that, you are going to see news related, again, the new building. There's a closer engagement with the industry. We are having more, not just from mining companies, but also from mining associations. We have a key event in September that is run by the Paine Institute, that it's a symposium on critical minerals. We are going to be working on the demand model and on this ecosystem with the USGS and the Department of Energy. To keep up the updates, please follow the regular channel on LinkedIn. We're not going to create a critical minerals specific page, but rather feed information through the main School of Mines page, also from the Office of Research and Technology Transfer, and through the Paine Institute. And that's it. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments?
Thank you, Alicia. We actually have now several questions in the chat. So if you're ready for those, I will go ahead and fire them off at you. So the
Sure.
first one coming from Dan. Dan, good to see you. Thanks for joining. Given China's lead in activity in this area and our administration's current attitude to new sources of energy, can the US ever catch up? If we can't, are there niche activities that can move us ahead of China in specialized areas?
Alicia, I'm happy to start, and if we want to supplement, then by all means, or others in our group might have answers. I have a feeling. I guess, and then this is probably just, it's important for me to say this is just sort of my views on this as just one individual. I feel like your question in part is related to sort of renewable energies, right? The solar panel lead, the EV battery lead that China has. And it feels like those would be extremely difficult for us to catch up on, and arguably not even worth the effort. There are a lot of other areas where the lead is not so stark. So if I think about new nuclear technologies, if we think about geothermal techniques, there are a number of areas that are energy related that we are still very competitive with, and probably are better off putting our efforts in that direction. Again, one guy's opinion.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Next question from Bob. He asks, how can countries diversify critical mineral supply chains fast enough to reduce the geopolitical dependence without simply shifting the bottlenecks from mining to processing, financing, permitting, and political risk?
Well, the first step is to create awareness of which are the critical minerals, because it is important to use the term critical minerals. That's bringing a lot of attention. But then when we start separating the problem, and we go back to the list of which are they, we are starting to see new players that could be solving the supply chain faster, right? Think about lithium, the lithium triangle in between Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia. They are unlocking that much faster that we can unlock it in the United States. And in terms of quality, in terms of permitting, there are very mature countries that are opening up and giving potential for byproducts and reprocessing. Thinking about, we have seen mining interest spiking in Jamaica and Dominican Republic. So this is something that can be done on the geopolitical level, as well as just in the pure market and investor community. In copper, we are looking, the investor community is starting to consider better the tier 2 projects as opposed to only the tier 1. So that can open like new, smaller mines, like say 60 to 100,000 tons of copper per year, could potentially contribute into the supply of a number of these products. I don't know if that answered the question, but.
I might jump in also with a little perspective, and part of the value of highlighting just how many different minerals there are, and we were talking about market size a little bit earlier. Some of the answers feel like they are pretty readily available and won't necessarily cost that much money. So, and that's partly a function of, unlike a copper, which Alicia knows so well, or some of the the larger volume products, think nickel or even lithium. A lot of the demand, is measured in the United States, is measured in tens of tons or 20 or hundreds of tons per year. We're talking about a few pickup trucks. So the fact is that, and the fact is that they are often accessible, albeit in very small concentrations, in what is being mined today. And so some of what we're looking at are what processing circuits can be added, perhaps at a cost of tens of millions of dollars, which would facilitate production in this country or in friendly countries of those. And so you're absolutely right to sort of focus on the fact that any solution involves different bottlenecks over time, but some of these can be handled seemingly relatively inexpensively, relatively quickly. Now, the technology doesn't always exist, but in some cases it does. And even some of what we've seen sort of starting up in the last, or at least announced in the last several months, is trying to address some of those smaller volume processing circuits to try to extract smaller volume minerals.
Great. Thank you both. We have another question from Joseph Long, and I might butcher this. So Alicia and Brad, let me know if this makes sense to you all, but or if Joseph needs to jump in. But his question is, where do mineral processing and extractive met fit into this? Metal? Meat?
Joseph, or is that met coal?
Metals.
Met. Well, maybe Joseph, if you want to jump on, you're welcome to ask your question or send a follow-up. If not, we'll jump to Christian's question real
I guess
quick.
it's, well, no, we can, metallurgy. Right. Thanks, Larson. Yeah, I think, I mean, one way to answer that perhaps is what we were trying to stress is this is very much a processing issue, or it often is very much a processing issue. And that cuts in a couple of ways. There are known processing techniques, processing circuits, if you will, that can be added to current mining operations or new mining operations that can help address this. I do think that there's a lot of R&D opportunity to consider, and that's some of what's going on at mines, to help think about whether there are less expensive ways to and more efficient ways to address the processing challenges.
Well, we had an offer
Very
in the
sure.
chat from Hoy to jump in.
Yeah,
Hoy,
please.
you want to wade in? Need you to unmute,
Okay,
Hoy.
I'm unmuted. So
There it is.
having been responsible for tantalum and lithium mines in Brazil and providing product to both China and the US on those projects, as well as graphite mining, antimony mining, and a few others. Really the biggest critical challenge from I'll call it a pipeline of engineers, the people that we need to bring in, is really mineral processing and extractive metallurgy. That's where the problems are. What makes these things so expensive is that these processes, particularly for, I'll call them the tier 3, the really minor metals that are out there, they're such small volumes and they're very, very complicated mineral processing operations. And so having tried to hire as many extractive metallurgists as I could for AMG Vanadium and AMG Mining, it's just really, really difficult to find those people that are involved in those particular things. And it's a discussion. I'm on the alumni advisory board for the metallurgical department at Mines, and it's one of the key topics that we talk about. We're expanding our board a little bit. We're bringing on another extractive metallurgist onto the board just to try to develop and to kind of get that. The other thing I think, particularly at Mines, what we need to do is entropy kind of took over with mineral processing and extractive metallurgy at Mines. They kind of came out of the metallurgical department and went to various other areas. And really the need needs to come back, and it needs to come back that the metallurgy department just really consolidates all those activities. But it's critical. And a lot of these mineral processing operations are not happening at the mine itself. For instance, on lithium, China is buying basically lithium concentrate. So the mine will basically concentrate the lithium up to about 6% lithium dioxide and then take that to China. And then China does all of the basically the conversion into a precursor for the battery market or wherever it needs to go there. In fact, I looked at building a plant in China about 5 or 6 years ago, and the big scare was that if we built a plant, then China would duplicate the plant, within several years of what we try to do there. So very complicated. So a long story short, we need metal processing and we need extractive metallurgy, and they need to be tied to the physical metallurgy side because that whole chain is so dependent on the quality of the product that's coming out and what the physical metallurgists need and to basically alloy and to make these products available. I don't know, Stephen, do you have any additional things that you might want to say on it?
Thanks, Hoy. I was actually I was writing another question on a different topic, but yeah, I think, it's become fashionable to talk about middle processing or, in the government. But basically, that's what happened is that the processing moved offshore. In many cases, the ores, as Hoy was talking about, are still in non-Chinese countries. It's just that, and I was actually writing. I'll just say this rather than the chat then, because it's a follow-up, and that's maybe for Brad to answer. When I started my career, I worked for a company here in the United States that made many of what we called minor metals, but they're critical metals on the list now. And that production moved offshore because of free market policies. It was just much more economic to produce them elsewhere. So the question is, does success for the United States and, say, the European Union mean that we have to move away from free market policies to controlled production?
Yeah.
And think about the consequences of that.
Yeah, he does good like most of the walk, and then
Oh,
There we go.
I was unrelated.
Right.
yeah, I mean,
We are clearly seeing signs of that.
I mean, for instance, I was the general manager of melting for Titanium Melting Corporation in Henderson, Nevada. And when I was there, we built a brand new titanium sponge processing facility. Well, now it's not in operation anymore. I don't think there's a single large titanium sponge producer in the US at this particular point in time. And most of that rutile and that type of stuff is coming from Australia or South Africa or, the west coast of Africa. There's a few mines, but again, the whole, I'll call it the Kroll process for titanium, that's basically left the US from a titanium standpoint, of which Mines has the Kroll Institute, which is kind of surprising a little bit, but
Oh, Clarkson, I saw you raise your hand, but something that Stephen mentioned, I think it's very, very important that happened in the industry beyond the critical minerals, which is the minor metals, right? That back on the 90s, I don't know the time frame, but when I started in this industry back on the 90s, it was okay to have a medium size operation with decent profit and do mining. Later, through economics crisis, I think it was like maybe 20 years ago that the traditional mining companies, the large mining companies, start talking about the tier one and the obsession with the big consolidate, simplified, and many of them have the strategy on like copper, iron ore, and even nickel became like a small nickel, molybdenum, cobalt, become like a small metals. So this expertise, the people that are now actively processing and that have the mining and the metallurgy processes, have been so focused on these few materials for so long that some of the expertise has gone away. At the same time, that if we add like a secondary recovery of any of the copper mines in the United States, we will just inundate the market to quantities that are not needed. And on top of that, this chart, so obviously we're thinking about price and volumes, but also the number of actors, right? Like if we produce copper or even nickel, we can go to the exchange and leave the material, and we don't even need to know who is buying it, right? Because we know that the material is going to be sold at the price. But for lithium and tungsten and the other critical minerals, we need to know who is going to buy it, when, at what price, where is it going to be delivered. So it's not just about we go and produce more rare earths in Brazil, and we transform them in California into a lab, into a refinery. But like, who is going to have? And then is when we are seeing now a more active participation from the downstream. So Ford, BMW, they are investing a lot in mine. So all the mining boom of nickel in Indonesia has been driven by the automotive makers, right? So that is bringing another complexity of where the value chain gets disconnected and confusion for the metallurgists of where to focus. Clark, so you had raised your hand. Can see if it's still the case.
It would be nice, Clarkson, for you to say hello anyway. Clarkson is both a PhD student here at Mines as well as a program manager at the Payne Institute. It'd be nice if you wanted to say hello. And if you had and I know you have a lot to say on all of these topics. So, but we may have lost him. Please, Hoy.
Yeah.
Please.
So the challenge in these really small metals, the big challenge for businesses is really the whole economic structure for these small businesses, how to deal with the economics and the capex and the processing fees and the process, and then to have a very volatile market out there. I mean, the big problem, if you take a look at lithium, for instance, when I took responsibility for the lithium for the mine in Brazil, and basically we were stockpiling the lithium. I mean, lithium was probably $200 a ton for concentrate at the time. And we had to, when lithium prices started to escalate, we had to act very, very quickly. And you have to get capital, you have to have design, you have to have a lot of things to get the capex put together to recover the lithium. And it took us about 2 years to get a plant going. And then to have the capital available to be able to support that capex is really a challenge on the smaller side. And these small companies really worry about it because they can put 100 million, $200 million into a small mineral processing facility, and then all of a sudden, what you thought was going to be a profitable material, the market dropped. And if you take a look at lithium concentrate prices that move from $300 a ton up to, I think, 25, even up to $70,000 a ton for lithium carbonate delivered to China. And then all of a sudden, you think you're going to be making lots of money, and all of a sudden the market drops significantly. And I think it's probably around $10,000 a ton today for lithium concentrate. It's just such a difficult thing to deal with. And that's where, one time the U.S. had a very nice stockpile policy. When I worked at Titanium Metals, the U.S. stockpile was pretty heavy. And I think that's where, sometimes to moderate the market, having some guarantees or some floors on pricing and that kind of stuff for some of these producers helps. And I think that's where the stockpile helps a little bit too. I mean, basically the U.S. sold off all of their stockpile, their major components at basically rock bottom prices. I bought titanium sponge out of the U.S. stockpile for like $1 a pound, and the market price was around $5 a pound. I mean, they just dumped that material out there, and it'd be nice if we had some capability. And that's where I think policy really has a big effect on what's happening in Washington, and that's where I think Mines has some big opportunity to help out a little bit there. If it's going to be a U.S. based policy, where you're talking about one, the pipeline of engineers that come through the schools in the U.S. to be able to supply the technical expertise for these companies, and then two, provide some sort of financial support to guarantee that you're going to be hiring 100 or 200 people for these little small plants, and then 2 years from now you have to go through and you have to lay them all off because there's just no demand for those particular products. And having some sort of buffer in there I think would help the U.S. quite a bit. And I think that's really policy driven. And then take a look at Mountain Pass. I mean, Mountain Pass, I think, is is a travesty about what happened to Mountain Pass, and and having to shut down that facility, because of all the issues that were engaged in those processes. So
Hoy, on
Thank you.
that,
I didn't mean to
thank you.
cut you off, but you're actually segueing in a way to some of,
Yes.
I'd see Phil's question and Christian's question and Joe's. And we're starting to get into the policy issues, and so we can speak to that a little bit. And so, as Hoy was alluding to, having some sort of government intervention, right? Having an industrial policy anchor this is perceived to be very valuable. And there have been increasing efforts on the part of U.S. governments. I mean, in some ways, things started in earnest with the Trump administration, but then accelerated, expanded in terms of funds available in the Biden administration through the Loan Program Office, and those funds have been expanded yet further in Trump 2. But they are essentially speaking to what you guys are asking, right? Which is to develop or redevelop sort of a U.S. mining and processing capacity. They are still very heavily on the sort of the supply inducement side of things, right? Here is money, go build that plant, as opposed to doing a lot of the demand support. And I think that's a real important question that needs to be addressed, is how much demand support at what stage of a life cycle, all of those things. And my suspicion is that we need more of that and a broader set of it. But at least the commitment on the part of the government, the recognition has certainly changed. And not just in this space, right? It's happened elsewhere too, but the notion of having an industrial policy and specifically encouraging industries, that's, very much alive and well.
And Hoy, to complement Brad and Hoy, on the policy part, yes, we have seen the current administration being more active, and Project Bolt is a concrete example, as well as the discussion of price floors. The missing piece, and actually next week I will be in Washington and holding some meetings around this, is what is there for the demand, right? Hoy, to your point,
Sure.
you can put the money, build a plant, hire people, and in 3 years, even if, let's say, they can afford to lose some money, right, not make profit, but they cannot afford to keep the material. The material needs to be consumed by someone. And we do have, of course, the best mineral economic team. We are the only one in the United States, and a great set of doctors in economics. But what makes them unique is that we are sitting next to the people that are using and innovating. And that's a work that we are trying to promote on campus. We just don't see, okay, we need more copper for electric vehicles and rare earths for the magnets, but we are seeing substitution of nickel for magnesium in some alloys for steel. And we have those people a few feet apart in their offices and campus. And that's the work that we are trying to promote. What is the real demand, the real potential based on the properties of the elements for these critical minerals, to make the market more comfortable of like, okay, rare earths are being used for magnets, but for what else? Therefore, I can feel more comfortable on investing in my supply and processing pipeline. Thank you.
Maybe so,
John,
Joe,
if
you
I can-
asked about the impact. Sorry. Someone want to jump in?
Clarkson's here.
No, look, I just wanted at least to comment on the, I got broken off at least, when I was trying to comment when Hoy and yourself and Alicia were talking about the issue of some of these niche minerals. And I was just trying to add on to what Hoy and Alicia were saying concerning, some of these so-called specialist, maybe low volume but high volume minerals. And I was trying to point out to the fact that what distinguishes what maybe the Western Hemisphere and maybe the rest of the global South from, say, maybe for instance, at least the Chinese model, is the integration and the shortening of that whole chain, which they have done, whereby some of these things might not be making economic sense. If you look at it just as a simple metallurgical challenge or problem, then yes, there will not be the appetite in the West to fund something like that, because obviously it's not going to wash its face. But what we have realized, say, especially in the global South, with this push now towards resource nationalization, is that you have a complete integration, say, between what is happening at the mine level until you get to a lithium salt or a carbonate, the cobalt, salt. So they look at it as one business unit. So there's a kind of at least evening out of course. And that's the reason why, like now, at least, we're talking about China, exporting lithium at a grade of 3%. Yet, that at least on the Shanghai Stock Exchange, you want, spodumene concentrate, say 6.2%. They don't mind exporting it at that level simply because they are not looking at it just as a simple metallurgical problem. They are looking at it as an input to a battery technology or whatever the case might be. And that's what has allowed them to kind of at least have this leapfrog thing whereby then they build the volume that you require then to justify that. And that seems to be at least one of the things that they have done, which the rest of the world is kind of averse to, and therefore they've become the kitchen of the world, because you now cannot beat that because they've built that critical mass and the volume and the technologies, as Brad was saying, to say now they've actually overcapacitated. And they are comfortable with that because now this is the time where they are now kind of using that almost like to the extent that at least they can almost use it as a weapon, because of the capacity that they have. So I suppose it's something that policy and government have to come into that, to break that stranglehold.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for jumping in. Great conversation.
Mhm.
I think we're gonna slowly start wrapping up. We're reaching time. I think I'm gonna ask maybe the last question, but if there's other questions that folks have, please make sure you send them on in and we will get those answered for you. But I think I want to direct my last question to Alicia. Since your role is new, you've been here for 4 months. I think we're all curious, and I'm definitely curious, is what are the things that you are currently focused on? What is most pressing? What are you trying to accomplish right out of the gate?
Thank you. So I guess this slide is a good answer for that. So very pressing and very, very good challenge is the new building that is going to be dedicated to critical minerals and how to create, together with the Beck Center that has already been working with the startups, the National Lab of the Rockies are also have their own startups programs. So how can we learn from them? At the same time, Jen Scheffer, who is leading the energy strategy on campus, she also has a great expertise for startup community. So we have a very nice team with diversified backgrounds to work and take the best value for the building in a good way. So that is something very important. Another piece is the closer engagement with industry. So as we know, a good part of our research funding has been cut because of the changes on the federal administration. And industry is willing to come and we need to be closer to them, funding or not funding, right? We need to be solving problems. We need to be more practical. We need to be connecting the value chain. So that is something else that I'm focused on, how to start connecting, helping industry to understand how academia works, at the same time that trying to influence or support our faculty on how to connect their research into real problems. And of course, if funding comes tied to that's where we want to be. Third one is the Critical Minerals Symposium at the end of September. This is big shout to the Penn Institute people, has been growing, and each year we have more interest from speakers and attendees. This year we are going to perhaps start having side sessions and make it a Critical Minerals Week, because the symposium itself is only 2 days, but having other parts of campus that also want to have a larger participation, as well as the ecosystem between the USGS and the Department of Energy, especially from the National Lab of the Rockies, that's something that joins the pieces. And on my more economic background, but also especially seeing the need of what is the missing piece of the puzzle is the demand model. So right now we are trying to find local funding internal on what is really the potential. So not consumption in terms of like how many electric vehicles, how many people are going to buy electric vehicles and how many tons of copper each one has. So like it's a simple multiplication based on the assumption. That's just estimating consumption. When we say demand model is what is the real potential and need for these elements. And with that, we believe that contribution of mines to the discussion in how much and where is the price mechanism that is going to unlock and give more comfort for investors and innovation to bring in the supply that is needed. And perhaps also there's a communication campaign coming, so follow us on social media, give a like and subscribe if you haven't. And with that, I will close, and just also please reach out. We are trying to make as close as you. You are a very important part for us and very dear, the alumni. And also, like, I'm married to an alumni of mine, so I couldn't be closer to the community. Thank you.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you, especially Alicia and Brad. Thank you both so much for today's session and for presenting to everybody. And thank you to all for attending. Great to see everybody. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Just going to quickly end with a plug. Next month, May, is the final lunch bunch of the academic year. We'll take the summer off. So we're going to end the semester, in the year, with a lunch bunch on Thursday, May 21st. That is focused on the Mines Foundation, which is where I'm housed. So if you're interested in knowing what goes on behind the scenes here for all of the events, the communications, the fundraising, how we connect with mines, it is one that's close to my heart. And if you all are engaging with us this way, it may be as close to yours as well. So it should be a phenomenal event. But with that, thank you to everybody for attending. Thank you for our presentations, and happy E-Days, everybody. I hope you all can get out and enjoy maybe some fireworks or a cardboard boat race. So with that, bye, everyone.